It used to be you could buy a swarm of GW plastic for comparatively next to nothing, but that door has almost slammed shut. There is, however, one last bastion of hope for us all. My name is Benji, and this is the guide to your first 750 points of Skaven, edutaining you with 2 differing armories for you to gnaw on, leaving you less time for brain stretching and more time for the gluing and painting of things. We opted for 750 points because, if you didn't already know, there are 2 starting breakpoints in 3rd edition Age of Sigmar. 600 points where you start your Path to Glory narrative adventure, and the aforementioned 750, which is the lowest recognised tier for matched play. So why not cater for both? As for themes, we opted to use 2 of the 5 available clans as the fulcrum for each army. Clan Scryer for their warpstone chicanery, and Clan Moulder for their mutant proclivities. And we'll be doing all of this without making said clan a crutch and a hindrance for us to express ourselves moving forward. So to the lists, and because the Great Horned Rat said so, we'll start with Clan Scryer and their wizardry with a splash of engineering build. As is our wont to do, we kick things off with the leaders, and our de facto general is an Arch Warlock, who's emblematic of how gonzo these little fellas can be. So you can cast 2 spells, that's a straight win. But you can also overload his beat stick in melee combat and his warp lightning storm, in case their vanilla output just doesn't cut it. When swinging with his storm cage halberd, that simply means exchanging the usual D3 attacks and damage 2 with D6, at the cost of taking D3 mortal wounds every time you roll an unmodified hit roll of 1. Rough? Meet smooth. Similarly, Warp Lightning deals D3 mortal wounds to D3 nearby enemy units, or D6 mortal wounds if you're prepared to more than likely blow yourself up if you don't successfully cast it or it becomes unbound. Look, no one said playing Skaven wouldn't be interesting. But even if you don't like to gamble, this is a solid unit to stick at the top of our army. Next up is a Warlock Bombardier for all of your 2nd tier leader needs. Rocking just the 1 spell, this War Scroll looks and is a toned down version of the Arch Warlocks. With his ranged Doom Rocket similarly overloadable and at 18-inch range and 3 damage apiece, the increase from D3 to D6 attacks is not an insignificant buff. Their Warp Lightning Sons the Storm just targets the 1 enemy unit as opposed to multiple, with a slightly less painful drawback than his Arch compatriot receives. But for just over 2/3 of the cost, you get what you pay for, and we'll take as much spell slinging as we can muster. What comes next in the battle line slot will probably surprise no one, as we're rocking a cheap and plentiful 2 units of 20 clan rats, as chaff gets. But that's why we're bringing bucket loads of them. 2 units of 20 might seem like a lot, but trust me, you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm frankly amazed they have a 5-up save for their cost, and their rusty melee weapons require volume in numbers to do much in the way of meaningful damage. Thank the big rat in the sky then for the ability to bring D3 models back to the battlefield at the end of each turn. What more do you want me to say? They're iconic, they're disposable, and maybe, just maybe, they'll surprise you. Now, I really wanted to bring you a unit of Scryer Acolytes for full thematic immersion, but you can only buy them in blisters of 1, and we can't assume you're happy to proxy or get alternatives 3D printed. But just note they're out there if you want yourself some wicked short range damage, and perhaps then just pray for some new plastic minis sometime this decade. But wait right there, list builders, because we're bringing 2 1-model units that can hide inside your clan rats and pop out and deploy within 3 inches at the end of the shooting phase for some shooty. The first of which is a rattling gun, which follows in the footsteps of the Warlocks because you have 2 choices here. One is 2 D6 plus 3 damage 1 attacks, and the other amounts to double or nothing, and out to be sniffed at 4 D6 plus 3, albeit both at short range. The downside is if you roll doubles on the 4d6 roll, your unit goes bye-bye after the attacks are resolved. You see, this sort of risk reward makes more sense to me because if you don't view this medieval chain gun as anything other than a glass cannon, then you're probably not in the right headspace. Its brother, sister, cousin once removed is a warp fire thrower. Where the Ratlins were happy to spray lead, then this Willy Wonka revels in chucking warp fire, which incidentally can only be done at a shorter 8-inch range. Still, scaling with the number of enemy models in the target unit is all sorts of noise, and every time you roll a 4-up, bearing in mind there's no need for hit and wound rolls here, the enemy unit takes a mortal wound. The obligatory supercharged version of this increases its range to 12 inches, and you wound on a 3-up instead of 4, but then you take a mortal wound on each unmodified roll of 1. This missile weapon is about as swish as it gets, so just hope your clan rats don't take heavy fire, as these will do all sorts of damage output if they're left to do so. To finish off our list, we're bringing a slightly less sneaky warp lightning cannon that your opponent's going to struggle to miss on the battlefield. Here we have a big gun that rolls a d6 against the target within 24 inches, and then rolls another 6 dice, and any that were equal to or greater than that initial dice roll will inflict a mortal wound. Here though, you're even more exposed to the unpredictability of dice rolling, but you must have already made your peace with that in picking Skaven in the first place. Interestingly, to overload this you need a Warlock Engineer, which is a very similarly priced unit to that of our Warlock Bombardier, but the trade-off just wasn't worth it, as the range capabilities of Bomboy outweigh any synergies you might get from the Engi. You can still pick one if you absolutely positively have to max your synergy levels out, but for me, I'd just consider adding the Engineer as you expand your army. So, yeah, we fit a lot of shiznit in there, and that is life in the Skaven lane. You got a dash of long range, a pinch of medium, and a bunch of handbags range, and nothing that really screams shoot at me first, all for 740 points of the matched play variety. Build 2 then, Clan Moulder inspired and ready to trot out the weird and wonderful, starting with just the one leader who goes by the generic name Greyseer. We couldn't make room for Clan Moulder's named character for reasons that will come apparent, so why not one of the most ubiquitous leaders the Battletome has to offer? On par with the Arch Warlock in that he's able to sling 2 spells a turn, but, and this is the fun part, when trying to cast a spell, you can roll 3d6 instead to try and roll exactly 13. And if the spell goes off, then it cannot be unbound. But if you don't roll 13, you then get to pick 2 of those 3 dice rolled and use that as your casting roll, at the cost of d3 mortal wounds in the face. And that's a potentially decent chunk of your 5 wounds overall. The Seer's bespoke spell Wither keeps with the theme of 13, here in the guise of its range, but to the tune of d3 mortal wounds to the chosen unit, and the debuffing of the same unit's melee hit rolls. A double-edged spell, if you will. Right, battle line. I didn't want to go this route because it's boring, but a unit of 20 clan rats was necessary to bring some meat to the battlefield. Now, I just need to fill the air with why these are the definition of average, and you'll be glad to have a blob of models on the battlefield no matter what else you're bringing. But, that's it. That's all you're getting. Clan rat, good. Accompanying Westeratas in the battle line though is a unit of 3 Storm Fiends. Now we're talking. Look at these overgrown rodents acting like weird is wonderful. 6 wounds and a 4-up save kick off proceedings, a check in the survivability column, but then we get to the weapons rack worth of choices for each model in the unit, of which each has a choice of 2 loadouts, leaving one model as more of a dab hand at short to medium range, another that's a more hybrid selection but can commit to full melee if you want them to, and the other is the tank and up close beat stick any which way you swing it. Suffice to say, the stat lines of all these weapon choices are all sorts of damage 2 and damage d3 goodness, and with pretty much all of them averaging out to around 3 or 4 attacks per weapon, that's the best part of 20 plus meaty attacks winging their way towards your opponent. Of course, all that potency comes at a cost, but we want it different, and these sure do pack a punch while doing it. And speaking of different, how's about the fact that we've already at the last unit in the army? That's right, we've moved heaven and earth to squeeze a behemoth into a 750 point list. Behold the ludicrously attractive Hell Pit Abomination. Yes, the clue's in the title, there's no romance in our A-bomb's future, but there is plenty of killing and maiming. A generous, if somewhat unpredictable 2d6 move is a bit unnerving, but the 14 wounds and 5 up save means the odds are good of reaching your destination and getting at least one swing with this avalanche of flesh, gnashing teeth and flailing fists. Set avalanche is nasty as all get out, starting with a dishing out of mortal wounds on a 2 up whilst it's at full or nearly full health for every model in the target enemy unit. The teeth and fists then provide a variable amount of rend and attacks at 2 and 3 damage respectively, such to make your opponent weep. But just a cherry on top, the beauty found within this little puppy dog is an ability to heal D3 wounds every hero phase. The suavity to negate the effects of a spell on a 4 up, oh, and the roll on a table when it dies to either inflict one final batch of wounds on a nearby unit, or on a 5 or 6 basically just not die and heal d6 wounds. Obviously you expect the wow factor with behemoths, and this little gorgeous creature certainly delivers. And I'll be dipped in shizzle, that was a perfectly nailed on 750 points of mostly big and bad mutants. I'm sure you can appreciate now the need for some wide board presence with the clan rats, but methinks the abomination and the storm fiends bring their own unique presence. Like I alluded to at the outset, we could have brought a master moulder leader instead, but we just didn't get to the point where we were cramming in clan moulder pack war scrolls like rat ogres and rat swarms to synergise with him. In terms of cost, it's still not the prettiest of sights. This is GW after all, but in the first list you're getting a whopping 45 models for that price. Granted, 40 of them are 20-year-old rat sprues, but why go glass half empty? Good news with the other list though, as you're getting the bulk of the models in the Vanguard Skaven box set, which brings the cost down cheaper than it would if you bought everything separately, and incidentally the Grey Seer can only be bought in this box at the moment. Not only that, you'll get a warp lightning cannon lumped in for free as well, so job's a good un. But that there was and is a horde of rats from every angle. I do hope you found these lists helpful and it gave you an idea on how to get started on your Skaven journey. Alas, I've been the voice in your head and this video has ended.